Hi everyone, it's me again. It's been a long time since I have done one of these videos, and I think my last video also on the COVID-19 vaccine was back in January, and here we are in May. I try not to talk too much and only present information when it is most needed, and so here we are yet again with the most recent EUA, or Emergency Use Authorization, from the FDA on the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine for teens ages 12 to 15. I assume there are many parents out there who have questions and concerns. Even if they were happy to vaccinate themselves, it's a little bit of a different story when it comes to our children. And so I hope that my video can provide you with information on how to navigate through this process and help to alleviate some of the concerns that some of that misinformation that is out there is currently causing in many parents. Just for those of you who don't know me, let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Dr. Namisha Amin, and I am a pediatrician here in Bakersfield, California. I'm also a pediatric nephrologist. And I was raised here in Bakersfield, and then I moved down south and I went to college at the University of California, Irvine, and I stayed there for another 4 years for medical school. I then went to UCLA, which is where I did 3 years of pediatric training, and then I stayed for another 3 years to subspecialize and become a pediatric nephrology. After finishing all those years of training, I moved back to Bakersfield, and I've been in clinical practice doing both general pediatrics as well as pediatric nephrology for almost 11 years now. Vaccines are a part and parcel of a pediatrician's daily work life. We spend much of our time talking to parents about what vaccines are needed, why, and what to expect after the vaccines. Hence, this video kind of comes a little bit naturally to me, and I wanted to take the opportunity to share my thoughts and hopefully alleviate some of the concerns that you may be feeling right now. And just as I started my last 2 vaccine videos, which I know can be a touchy subject, this video is for anyone who is nervous, anxious, scared, hesitant, overwhelmed, and feeling lost when it comes to making a decision about the vaccine and their children. And if you're an anti-vaxxer, but you're simply here to hear a different point of view, you are more than welcome too. However, if you are an anti-vaxxer that is here to call me names, to berate me, or to have disrespectful discussions in the comment section, please understand that I will donate $500 to vaccine research for every anti-vax campaign that uses my name or my face. And if you choose to get ugly and bring my children or my family into it, I will donate $1,000 to vaccine research on behalf of both of us. So let's get started. How much has actually been studied in children so far? Well, to date, 2 million teenagers ages 16 and 17 have received the Pfizer vaccine so far with no red flags, which is wonderful because you're never going to have a study with 2 million participants. That's real world data, and not seeing any red flags is a great sign. Then we have the Pfizer study, and that one included 2,265 children ages 12 to 15. The kids were randomized to 2 different groups. Either you receive the vaccine or you receive a placebo, and that included, for the vaccine, both of the doses 4 weeks apart. In the vaccine arm, there were no cases of COVID. In the placebo arm, there were 18 cases of COVID. The antibody levels in the kids that were vaccinated were actually better than that of those in the 16 to 25-year-old age group that was in the previous study. And the side effect profile was very similar to the 16 to 25-year-olds. They saw pain at the injection site, possibly some headache, fever, chills, body aches, sort of the usual that you've been hearing about, but nothing concerning, and certainly no long-term complications, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Now, Moderna, which is another company that also has an mRNA vaccine, is in the process of completing their trial as well. And they have 3,235 children in their study, ages 12 to 17 years of age. And they then randomized that group in a 2-to-1 style. So 2/3 of the participants got the vaccine and 1/3 got the placebo. And their data is still preliminary right now. They are only 35 days out of having all of their participants receiving the second dose. But there have only been 12 cases of COVID in total, giving them a 96% efficacy rate so far. And the side effect profile is, again, very similar to what we are seeing in the adults. The usual symptoms and no red flags about major or serious complications. Now, for some of you who have seen or heard that there have been 9 pediatric deaths reported from the COVID-19 vaccine on the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, or VAERS for short, I can tell you that these are most likely false claims. And the reason is because if there were to have been any deaths within these studies, which have been completely micromanaged and so highly scrutinized, the researchers from the study would have reported that with their press release data. There is simply no way they wouldn't have been able to present that data to us. Outside of these trials, no other children under the age of 16 have even been allowed to have access to the vaccine. So how is it that they could have died from something that they didn't actually receive? And anytime a death is reported to VAERS, the FDI and multiple panels of experts will go in and investigate. But if there's no medical records, if there's no parents, if there's no medical professionals to support the claim, then obviously they have to assume it's a false claim. So this brings me to my next point. What about the long-term complications of these vaccines, which I know for many is a big concern, particularly because they have a relatively new technology in them? And what about infertility in particular? With the massive amount of misinformation that has been spread specifically about this concern, I know why you guys are worried. I would be worried myself if I didn't have that sort of ability to figure out what's real and what's not. And that comes from all of those years of training that I talked about at the beginning of this video. I'm not going to go into great detail about the mechanism of action of the mRNA vaccine because I covered that in my first vaccine back in December. But here is what I can tell you. There are literally 0 remnants of the vaccine left in your body after about 72 hours of taking the vaccine. The nucleocapsid, or the fat bubble that protects the mRNA molecule, essentially degrades once it gets into our cells after injection. And the mRNA molecule that's there is also very unstable when it's not protected by that fat bubble, and it degrades as well. But before it degrades, it's around just long enough for our cells to translate it and make the spike protein, and then it essentially kind of dissolves. Now, our immune system sees that spike protein and it realizes that it's foreign in our bodies. It then creates a memory of the spike protein, it attacks it, and it gets rid of it, and then it's done. Now, the only thing that is left in your body is the memory by your immune system of the spike protein, such that if you were to ever be exposed to the SARS-CoV-2 virus in the future, your immune system would remember that spike protein that's sitting on the surface of the virus itself. It would attack it, it would get rid of it, and it would protect you. And so honestly, there's nothing left in your body to cause long-term complications. And it's also important to realize that virtually all side effects, minor ones and serious ones, that have ever been seen with any vaccine occur within the first 6 to 8 weeks after the vaccination. And that is exactly why the FDA has required at least 2 months of data before they will provide an emergency use authorization for these vaccines. And in the adult world, we have more than 6 months worth of data, including in those 16 and 17-year-olds. So next, let's talk about infertility. I know many parents are worried about this because we all want our kids to have the opportunity to become parents themselves if they decide that that's what they want later down the road. The entire infertility issue arose because a single researcher back in December put out this theory. He said, well, the spike protein is really similar to a different protein that sits on the placenta. And he postulated with 0 data or evidence to support his theory that if the two proteins are similar and our bodies are making antibodies against the spike protein, maybe those antibodies are going to actually recognize the protein on the placenta and then attack it and try to get rid of it. And that's going to cause a woman to miscarry. If this were true, it would mean that every single woman who has ever been infected with COVID-19 since the start of the pandemic would miscarry after being pregnant. Millions upon millions of women, and we have not seen this. It would also mean that every single woman who has been vaccinated and who has subsequently become pregnant would also miscarry. And this has not happened, not in the 262 million doses that have been given in the United States or the 32.5 million cases that we have had in the United States. Formal studies have been done on this as well. In the New England Journal of Medicine, they looked at 35,000 women who either became pregnant after receiving the vaccine or were pregnant when they got the vaccine. And they found that there were no differences in the rates of miscarriage, stillbirth, preterm birth, congenital anomalies, or neonatal births in those babies born to those vaccinated women. There was also a smaller study that looked at the ovarian function, like actually how well the eggs are functioning, and they found no difference in the eggs of women who had been vaccinated as well as the eggs of those women who had been infected. So we know that the infection as well as the vaccine are not going to affect fertility in adult women or in our children. Last but not least, why do kids even need this vaccine? I like to think of this in three different areas: the medical benefit, the social benefit, and the practical benefit. The medical benefit is such that even though children are not nearly as likely to be affected seriously by this virus like adults, we can't forget that they still are able to get sick. There have been 3.8 million cases of COVID-19 in children. There have been somewhere between 300 and 600 deaths. There have been over 3,000 cases of MIS-C, and there have been 200,000 hospitalizations for children with COVID-19. Now, the hospitalizations and the deaths have largely been in children with underlying medical conditions, and this can include prematurity, chronic lung disease, a variety of metabolic or neurologic conditions. One of those metabolic conditions is obesity, and this is something that is not rare. It is something that many of our children have struggled with and something that the pandemic has made worse. And those children that have been affected by MIS-C, they often require at least 1 week in the pediatric ICU, and many of them did not have a severe disease to start, nor did they have underlying illnesses. So children are not immune to this virus, and I think it's important for us as parents to recognize that. The vaccine can and will protect them from a severe illness, as well as from complications like MIS-C or long COVID. Number 2 is the social benefit. Again, while most of our kids have not had a severe illness with COVID-19, it's really hard to deny that that every single one of our children have not adversely been affected by the pandemic in one way or the other. And if we want to give them back the lives that they deserve, like full-time in-person school, dare I say, without masks, their extracurricular activities, their sports, where as many people who want to go and watch them can go and watch them, birthday parties, travel, award ceremonies, then our kids have to be part of the solution. And we know that our kids can get and they can spread this virus. But every time a person, including a child or a teenager, gets vaccinated, they create a dead end for this virus. The virus cannot replicate, it cannot mutate, and it cannot shed to any significant degree in a vaccinated individual. So the more dead ends that we create for this virus, the fewer cases that we have. The fewer cases that we have, the fewer restrictions that we have. And the fewer restrictions that we have, the more normalcy that our kids will see in their own lives, which they so absolutely deserve. And on a side note, for those of you who have an immunocompromised individual in your family, there's something else that I want you to consider. There was a recent study in JAMA that looked at 658 solid organ transplant recipients who had received the vaccine. And unfortunately, 46% of them had no antibody response after both doses. 39% did develop some antibody response after the second dose, even though they had no response to the first dose. And only 15% had a measurable antibody response after both doses. And this is why herd immunity is so important. So we can protect those who have already gone through so much, like organ failure and organ transplantation, and don't have the ability to mount the same response as you and I do to the vaccine. Number 3, practical benefit. While this might seem a little bit arbitrary, I think it's important to talk about logistical issues. As our kids mobilize more in school and activities, they are going to be exposed more. Yes, our numbers are coming down, and that is absolutely a wonderful thing. But the virus is still very present within our community, and you don't know which activity or which school day is going to be the day where your child is exposed. And you may have actually seen recently that the American Academy of Pediatrics has now reported that children are making up a larger percentage of positive cases, up to 22% in the last week of April. And yes, we are comparing 3 kids out of 100 when we were at the height of the pandemic. And now perhaps it's 4 or 5 kids out of 20, but children are still contracting this virus. And if your child was to test positive, that's a 7 to 10 day quarantine at home for them. For the parents and the siblings who may test negative, they could have up to a 24-day quarantine. That is a lot of missed school and missed work for parents. And I would love to say that vaccinated parents wouldn't be subjected to that quarantine as well, but I don't know how workplaces are going to look at this. And they may worry that their employee has a child at home with COVID that they're taking care of. And they don't want to take that risk of having their employee come back to work and expose others and then have an outbreak in their workplace. And they may ask you to stay home for the entire duration of that quarantine. And many parents simply cannot afford to take 24 days off of work. And let's not forget what else can be missed in those 7 or 10 or 24 days of quarantine, including summer vacations, other parties, things that our kids have been looking forward to because they haven't done them in over a year. So wouldn't it just be nice to not test positive in the first place and avoid these issues altogether? I think so. So that's about it, friends. I know this is a lot of information to process, and of course, one more risk-benefit analysis that you have to weigh out. It is a tough decision, and I know many of you feel overwhelmed with all the information that's coming your way. For what it's worth, I will absolutely be getting my daughter vaccinated. She's not quite 12 yet, but when she is, I will absolutely get her vaccinated because I want her to live her best tween life, but I want to have peace of mind while she's doing that. So until next time, it is anticipated that there will be an emergency use authorization for our children ages 2 to 11 in September. So I'm not sure if that's the next time you're going to hear from me, but hopefully this video was helpful to all of you. Please share it and let me know if you have questions. Take care.